you want to. And then I am going to go to my... I'll start with the deck. I'd quite like to have your little face somewhere in here, though. Like that. Oh, yeah, you're in the corner of the screen.
Ooh.
So, Shelley, here we are.
Good morning. Well, good afternoon, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, I'm a bit weirded out by, doing this. And also, you know, just when you look out the window, it's a funny little time to be worrying about land supply, isn't it?
It is, but I suppose it's going to become even more crucial to understand what's going on outside when things start to become clearer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this might be something that we return to again and again. Although what I don't want to do, I had a conversation with DEFRA the other day, and they were thinking about what's going to happen about biodiversity net gain, and almost every sentence ended up starting with, well, if it weren't for this virus, blah, blah, blah. So what we should do, perhaps, is to play this fairly straight and pretend that it's not totally weird out there. And then maybe we can have a think at the tail end about practically what all this means. And then obviously people make their own calls about how they want to play it.
Yeah.
So just as a sort of technical note then, so we are recording this in Teams. We've each got slightly ropey internet connections. I've had to ask my children to get off Netflix and not use the internet, and they looked at me like, you know, with horror. I told them to read a book, and they looked at me seriously like I was insane. I'm also waiting for your children to come bursting into you demanding snacks, which is what they tend to do, isn't it?
Oh yes, particularly around now. Yeah.
But anyway, enough of I think what we're going to do. Sorry, go on.
That's fine.
So I think what we want to do is to try to get through this quite quickly, because people aren't going to sit down and watch 4 hours of banter, and then we can back it up with some sort of written questions and answers in the K-Hub.
Yep.
Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
So introductions. I am Richard Crawley. I am the program manager for PAS, and I've been looking after the delivery stuff for the last 3 years. And you are?
And I am Shelly Rouse, and I am seconded to PAS to look at things like housing delivery test and annual position statements from a local authority in North Kent.
And you're quite new, aren't you? How are you finding it?
Good, really exciting.
You sort of had to say that, didn't you?
It's really refreshing to kind of get out of your out of my local authority bubble and look at that wider picture. It's really exciting.
Excellent. So what we're going to do in the next, I don't know, 45 minutes maybe, is we are just going to introduce a couple of reference materials that we've put together to support the annual position statement process. I'm going to try to make the case that there are more people that should be interested in this than would otherwise be the case. And then you're going to take us through a little template that we've made to ease the way of making an application and a bit of comfort that they're applying for the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Right. So for all those people, can you see my screen, by the way?
Yes.
You can. OK, good. So if you can't bear this foolishness and this double act that we're doing, all the documents that we're going to be looking at are already in the K-Hub, and we'll put something about it in the website to support it. And we're not going to do anything to tidy up this mess of a performance, because once I read someone say, you know, the mistake that everyone makes when they're doing a blog or doing something online is they think that perfect is the only version that they're happy with, and they think, oh, we're going to go back and edit it and remove all the ums and the ahs and make everything. And because you never do, you never actually do anything. So we're going to be quick and dirty on this, and we're just going to have to cope. Right, so first thing I'm going to show you is the quick reference, which you can again tell me if this works. So can you see a little document?
Yes, yep.
PAS workshop handout. So people in government hate it when I do this, because it goes entirely against the spirit of having things like PPG online. And it means that having copied them out, if they change, this document doesn't change, and potentially you're allowing people to see things that are out of date, which is all true, and I accept all that. However, I think that there is a real merit for someone like me, who's a bit lazy and whose brain doesn't work very well, that you just put everything in one place and you let people scribble on it. So if you're happy to accept the fact that this might be out of date at some point, here is the handouts, and it just walks you through all the relevant parts of the PPG and the MPPF, because they're, you know, in two different places.
I mean, I always like to keep. I always like to keep a Word version of the PPG because it changes, and it's always handy to go back and see what it used to say. I think there is quite a lot of, you know, those key words that are highlighted is really useful to have a hard copy version.
Good. So we agree then. So I don't know that there's much that I want to say about this. I've done my own version of marking it up just to remind people of how the process is supposed to work, in that it begins at Reg 19, and in order to get the benefit of the annual position statement, you have to apply a buffer. And I also just bring together about this concept of deliverability that is in the annex to the MPPF. I think the only bit actually, and you know what, we can have a conversation here. I'm still not entirely sure that I've got all the dates right. So in here, there is, and it was a sort of a live issue, this, wasn't it? But only councils with a plan of a certain age can begin the process, and if effectively if your plan isn't up to date, then PINS will say, well, sorry, you don't get it. So I put together, as I always do, a little spreadsheet. Can you see my little spreadsheet?
Yes.
So I was sort of trying to get to grips with what this bit means for the purpose of paragraph 73B, which is the idea of being recently adopted. It says, for the purpose of that, a plan adopted between the 1st of May and the 31st of May. And I kept reading it, and I kept not really understanding it, so I put a little spreadsheet together of what I think that document says. It says if your plan was between May and October, it's up to date until the following October, which is there. And if it was between November and April, which is actually in the future, it also is up to date up until October. Is that what you think it means? Because if so, I can't understand why they've chosen to word it in that way.
Yeah, that's my understanding, that if it's between May and October, you've got till the following October, so October 21 or 20.
That is, yes, and then that's October 20.
Yeah, so and if it's between October on November, it's November and April. Again, you've got till the coming October. So I agree with you. It seems a very convoluted way to essentially say you've got until the following October.
Okay, so it's not just me then. No. And then the other bit that I think we are going to return to several times is this concept of deliverability.
Yes.
So this is the bit that's from the annex, isn't it? Where we talk about A sites and B sites, which I think is quite a helpful way of structuring a kind of a thought process about what sort of facts and evidence you need to marshal. And then there's a little bit of a run through of all the rest of the MPPG, which is actually, I think, pretty clear. It's pretty obvious, and it's quite helpful in places about setting out the things against which you're going to need to demonstrate that you've thought and done what it's asked you to do. So that, I guess, is just a little crib sheet handout. If we were all in the room together, I'd be handing them out and saying, please feel free to scribble on these, because that's the way I learn the best. And then I'd pause and say, anyone got any questions? But obviously we can't do that now. So this is the bit where I'm going to try and make a case that people might want to think in two ways about whether this thing works for them. So I think it's absolutely sensible and legitimate, notwithstanding everything that's going on at the moment, for councils to think there is this new thing. It requires us to do some extra work. is it the right thing to do? And I suppose doubly so now is it the thing to do right now, given all the other calls on people's time that there are, no doubt. My understanding is that the 31st of March deadline that's in the NPPF is a real one, which does mean next Tuesday is the deadline. And actually, particularly with the help of your template, it doesn't actually take much effort to do. So you might want to put a kind of notification in and reserve judgment on whether you're going to follow up on it, because it just feels like a weird time to be consulting lots of people about sites and saying, how confident are you that you're going to deliver in the next 5 years? Because I can imagine that right at the moment there's an almost entire absence of confidence about anything to do with this.
Yeah, but I think it is worth taking, like you said, the template, this could be a 5-minute job to notify. And I think it's probably worth, if you're even contemplating doing an APS process, it's worth chucking a notification in, because there are authorities last year notified PINs and then decided it wasn't for them. But it's always better to have that option of you can do this than you can't. And obviously the APS process is designed to be once you've done it once, you can do it again next year. And who wants to miss the boat when it could be done relatively straightforward this time round?
That's true. I hadn't really thought about it like that. An annual process, and you don't want to miss a year. So here is the way that I would have approached this. Here's how I think we are expected to approach this, which is, you ask yourself some questions. So do you qualify in that? Is your plan, did you adopt your plan after, what was that date? It was May, wasn't it? Yeah. Are you confident enough in your land supply that you don't ask a question to which you don't know the answer? Is this something that will save you time and hassle because you get challenges to appeal? Are you comfortable? Are you politically comfortable with the risk that the answer might be no, because people might disagree with you about how deliverable some stuff is? And are you able to do the work of marshalling the data by the 31st of July? In which case, this is the straightforward version of it, in which case the annual position statement is designed for people like you, and you should notify PINs by the 31st of March. I want to make a case, actually, that there is a different way of looking at this, which is, even if the answer to some of these questions is no, that the discipline and the approach and the tools and the data standards that we're going to put together for that annual position statement process might still be worth you doing. And it might be, I don't know, again, people don't like me doing this because I'm inventing a new concept, and there might be some confusion in people's minds that there's this thing called a draft APS. But actually, I think I'm happy to take a bit of a stick on that, because I think it's true. I think there is something that some councils might want to do anyway, even if they're not challenged, or even if they don't know that the answer is, or don't know that they want to go through the process in such a public way.
Yeah,
I think it's like, go on.
I agree, and I don't think a draft APS is such a sort of radical statement. Councils will already be doing their data gather for their housing land supply statement. There will always be this sort of engagement and adjusting the phasing and working out where your land supply is. I think the unique thing you're saying here is that, why don't we all try and do it the same way? Why don't we all try and coordinate our data in the same manner? And I would say, there's strength in numbers. If there's a uniform way of doing it, and we're all being consistent, that's got to have real benefit.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of making things boringly identical, which isn't to say that you can totally guarantee the outcome. But at least what you're not needing to do is to go, oh, well, shall I have these columns on my spreadsheet or those columns on my spreadsheet? And what if I, if you know that there are 7 steps and you can tick them all off, either actually really, or in your mental list, then you know that you're not going to make stupid mistakes. And avoiding stupid mistakes is just something I'm a big fan of, not making stupid mistakes.
Yeah.
So this is
also from like an appeal point of view, if you've got got your data in a certain format and you can rely on it and you haven't missed things out, you know that you can confidently bring that out for different appeals. And inspectors would love it, you know, making sure everyone's doing it in kind of the same way with kind of the same information. You know, we might get some more consistency over these issues of what is a deliverable supply.
Mm. So this is the bit then when we do the trapeze act of passing control over to you, because you're going to talk us through the template.
Yeah.
We could have like a musical interlude at this point, couldn't we? Oh, something's happened.
How's that?
That looks good to me, actually.
So this is the notification template that we've put together to, I suppose, try and help authorities work out if the APS process is good for them, and what sort of things they might need to think about. Yes, make sure we can get all the text on the screen.
Okay.
It's trying to ask a number of questions about whether the APS process is right. And those are things about asking the questions about whether the plan falls into the category of being recently adopted, and whether the risks have been thought through, and whether that's a comfortable position for your particular council. So the template is formed of two things. The first thing is almost like a decision tree. It's a kind of checklist of questions that you're going to need to ask yourself, and it's going to highlight where, if those answers are no, you might need to seriously consider whether the APS process is right for you at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part of the template is the actual form, where you can fill in some of the data and then send that off as your notification to PINs. And it's got the email address that it needs to be sent to as well.
Okay, do you want to walk us through it?
Yeah. So first thing is the APS process for you? And there are a couple of questions you're going to need to ask yourself, and hopefully this guide is going to help you work out. So number one is your plan considered recently adopted? Of the 3 APSs that were submitted in 2019, one was found not to be recently adopted. And so this has highlighted a real issue for councils to think very, very carefully about whether their plan meets the initial criteria. So we've tried to, because it's year specific, be helpful, and put the actual dates in here. So the first thing is, if the plan's adopted prior to the 1st of May 2019, it's an automatic kind of you're going to be considered as recently adopted. If your plan's going to have been adopted after May and you fall into the between May and October last year, then yes, your plan will be considered recently adopted up until the 31st of October this year. So the APS process would be open to you. And then the second sort of window of plans being recently adopted is if your plan was adopted between the 1st of November last year and the 31st of April this year. Obviously, we haven't got to that part yet. That's in the future. But your plan will be considered recently adopted up until 31st of October this year. So if your plan has been adopted between May last year and today, then you can think about whether the APS process is right for you, and you would be classed as recently adopted until October this year.
What about, just to ask a sort of maybe an unfair question, you know, this new thing that we can do about having a plan review? You can consider your plan, review your plan, and make a case as to it still being up to date. Do you think that would effectively give you, I mean, it's not the same as adopting a plan, is it?
No, I don't think it is. And the PPG is quite clear. It is about whether your plan's been adopted. And I suppose there are two ways that you can confirm your housing land supply, and one of those is through an examination of your local plan, and those is through the APS process. And there's no mention of, well, that could be done via a local plan review. So I would say no, that criteria wouldn't apply.
Right. In which case, I suppose it is more essential, if you don't want to adopt a plan every year, that you have to adopt it, and you have to have an APS, and you have to continue to APS it each year, because it's difficult. Once you've climbed off, it's difficult to climb back on. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the process was designed to be, you know, you go through quite a lengthy process at your local plan examination to reach a confirmed housing land supply, and the APS process is designed to almost be a kind of annual review and top up of information, so that you can kind of keep that confidence going.
Okay.
And so the second part, one of the key parts of the APS process, is stakeholder engagement. And the PPG gives some really good advice on who you need to involve in the stakeholder engagement and what kind of questions about sites and their deliverability you should be asking. For some councils, this will be quite a big step change from how they normally do their housing monitor or sort of end of year phasing information gather, but for other councils it will be very much a kind of embedded behaviour and won't be too much of an extra piece of work. So I suppose this question is very much around are you confident you're going to be able to get all your data together on your site's phasing? Are you going to be able to do stakeholder engagement or potentially consult on that information, and when you think sites are going to be coming forward and at what rate? I'm having a really hard think about whether that's possible within your own processes and set up at the moment to achieve by the 31st of July this year. It's a pretty tight deadline.
Okay.
And then transparency and FOIs and web pages. So whilst it's not explicit in the PPG, I think there are some risks around what data is made available, which really need to be understood before anybody considers the APS process. In a nutshell, you need to be aware that the APS in all its stages, so a draft version that you may then consult on or do some stakeholder feed into, the version that you then send to the planning inspectorate, the inspector's report that comes back, and the finalised version with those changes from the inspector's report incorporated into it, can all be subject to FOI and should all really be made publicly available on your website. The responsibility for sort of hosting an APS is for the local authorities. It's almost like hosting a kind of mini examination page. So you really need to be certain that you are happy having lots of land supply information in the public domain when you're going through that process of data gathering and consultation. So you're not just going to be putting the kind of finalised version of your land supply. and phasing information on the web pages. It's going to be all the sort of nitty gritty toing and froing beforehand as well. Which again, you know, that's a big ask for councils to think about, that it's going to be such a transparent process, and that basically everything is FOIable.
Is there a developer angle to that as well? I mean, that's kind of, you've spoken about that very much from the LPA perspective, but do you think there'll be anything from a developer point of view about being worried about there being such detailed delivery stuff in the public domain? I don't think that there is, but I'm just wondering.
No, I'm not sure that is, and I think the reason there's a need for transparency is because there may be others with an interest in delivery. So whether that's developers or promoters of other sites, or you know, people like infrastructure providers who will want to see what the council are saying and what the promoter of that particular site are saying, and kind of come to what their view of you know, who's right, and essentially then inform which sites are going to be classed as disputed sites.
Okay.
And so this is just a bit of a clarification about what the planning inspectorate are actually going to do once they've received your APS statement and the data that sits behind it. So for stage one, they're going to basically find out if you meet the initial criteria, which is it a recently adopted plan? Yes or no? And if you've gone through the stages we've set out in the template, then you'll already know the answer to that. Is it a renewing APS? So there were 3 authorities who submitted an APS last year. They are eligible to submit one this year as part of the renewing process.
Well, I think one of them is.
Yeah. And then, has satisfactory stakeholder engagement been carried out? Now, there isn't a definition within the PPG on what satisfactory stakeholder engagement is, but it's one of the questions that the planning inspectorate are going to ask. And again, the onus is very much on councils to put as much information about what engagement they've done in the development of the APS as possible. So you need to be confident that the planning inspectorate are going to be being able to answer those questions with a yes and not a no. And the second stage is the planning inspectorate will essentially look at everything that's been submitted on the sites that make up your housing land supply and determine whether they consider they're deliverable. So they're going to be asking themselves 2 questions. Essentially, has a local authority submitted enough evidence to demonstrate the site is deliverable? And are those sites deliverable? So it's, have you done enough data or evidence? And then the second question of, does that data or evidence show that those sites are deliverable in line with Annex 2 of the framework, which goes back to that kind of A and B category we were looking at earlier. The inspectorate will then make adjustments to that supply. Some sites they might choose to remove, saying that there isn't sufficient evidence been submitted, or they might adjust the number of dwellings that site is contributing to the supply. So this goes back to that question of, are you confident in your land supply picture? Because it's a real risk. You need to understand that the inspector can remove sites or adjust the yield of those sites, and that will affect whether you've got a 5-year housing land supply or not. And there's a really, really fundamental risk to understand that you might go through all of this work and the planning inspectorate will determine you don't have different livable sites. And the way the APS process works is that you then don't have a 5-year housing land supply for 12 months, I believe. So it's a risk that needs to be carefully thought out before you decide the APS process is for you. On a more positive note, I can really see the benefits if you are in an authority that is repeatedly challenged on your land supply, having a process which means that you have your land supply confirmed and then the ability to reapply in 12 months' time to have it reconfirmed. Yeah, I mean, that just seems like a dream come true, really. So whilst there are risks, there is a real benefit in this process.
And is that the lot?
So these last pages are actually the sort of form that if you want to notify the planning inspectorate, here's a form you can use, and that will make sure that everyone's submitting the same type of information in the same format, and there's consistency across those submitting. So it's quite straightforward. It's the name of your authority, some contact details, confirmation of whether you are renewing an APS you've done previously, or whether you've got a recently adopted plan. So key information such as what the title of your plan is, what the name is, the date of adoption, and then a kind of decision tree. Yeah, demonstrating to pins at the other end that yes, you've thought about, are you classed as recently adopted, and here you can see. And then a key thing about informing the planning inspectorate of what the housing delivery test has been for your authority, and therefore what appropriate buffer should
the little
be added.
darlings can't look it up for themselves, can they?
No, they're not allowed to use Google, so you need to be telling them in this template and in the evidence you submit to them for the APS, pretty much everything about your land supply. Oh, sorry.
It's not a persistent cough, is it?
Email address to oh God, I hope not. And there is the email address that's been specifically set up by the planning inspectorate to receive not only notification emails, but the actual themselves. Yeah.
Okay. So, shall I take back control?
Yeah. Let me stop sharing.
So good job. I mean, it's a simple template that's designed to allow people to understand the risks and to make sure that they don't think that this is for them when it's not, so that they don't go through the whole hassle or the whole set of work of preparing an APS only to find out that they fail the qualification.
Yeah.
So and then just I suppose what I wanted to finish with, just sort of briefly, is just a quick what happened. What are we doing next to support councils through this process? And I guess I just wanted to share. It's all a little bit scrappy and it's not ready yet, but I just wanted to share some of the things that we're making. So there is going to be. So can you see my deliverability crib sheet?
I can.
So deliverability is going to be right at the heart of this, isn't it? And I think there's two jobs here. One is helping people understand what a reasonable process looks and feels like. And then there's the kind of more technical aspect to it, which is actually practically how can you marshal all this stuff so that you can count it and pins can interrogate it and it all kind of doesn't, because for even quite small councils will have lots of data to marshal. So the more help we can make, the better, I think. So I guess this is again this crib sheet that is taken from the annex A and B. So A is deliverable unless something suggests otherwise. It's the B stuff, isn't it, where further evidence should be provided.
It is.
And I guess what I'm gone.
So your A stuff is almost you know, your gold standard stuff. It's stuff that's got a full consent. It's stuff where you've got reserved matters stuff happening. You've got anything with a full detailed permission that you can comfortably rely on in your land supply. It's kind of that's your, you know, your untouchable deliverability stuff. It's very much the category B. So anything that's undetermined, anything that's an outline application with no subsequent applications, anything that's the allocation stage, or PIPs, or anything off the brownfield register where it's that test of clear evidence needs to be provided.
And again, I think, well, just to go slightly sideways with that, and then I'll get back to the point, is, I mean, one of the frustrations that we've got when thinking about land supply more generally is, you know, the A stuff isn't that interesting. I mean, we know lots about it. It's been through a recent planning application. When you talk to people about, you know, what the pipeline looks like, the A stuff is always, people are really confident. It's the B stuff that's more difficult to understand and difficult to sort of forecast. But actually, that's where all the interesting stuff is. Which again is why I think having a standard approach, and a standard method, and a standard data standard is not just going to be interesting for and useful for a single council. It's going to be interesting for us when you want to think about land more generally.
Oh, definitely.
So here is my first stab at putting a common sense process together. So I think it starts with putting sites into the appropriate category, and I've you know, A and B, but there are probably some others that we can usefully design as well. And then I think I would always argue that you should, as someone going through this process, don't, you know, nature hates empty boxes. I think you should start by saying, here's our initial assessment, because it makes it really easy then for people to go, yeah, that looks about right. And I don't have to do a great deal of effort. And if you think about a developer with land in many different places, they're not, in the end, when the APS process, if the APS process is used by lots of councils, they're not going to want to get hundreds of these things and have to do loads of work. So I would say make an initial assessment. And if your initial assessment, the assessments and the measures and the yardsticks or the rules of thumb or whatever you want to call them that you used at your local plan examination, they should be your starting point.
Yeah.
Then I think you need to think about this engagement process. So you need to have a reasonable timetable. We've already said this, you know, you haven't got long here. So, you know, the idea that you might go through a two-stage engagement process, or the idea that you might allow, you know, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I mean, that's, you know, that's going to be tough. I think you're going to have to, at the beginning, think about what a realistic assessment is. And as always, you might want to think about your SCI and whether you have inadvertently given yourself a tricky timetable in your SCI.
Yeah.
Then, you know, in terms of the process, I think the MPPG is helpful. It explains who you've got to talk to and why you've got to talk to them. And I think you should, you know, in the design of the data, we're going to allow it to make it obvious where effectively you want people just to double check, or just, you know, there's a recent application. Are you still going? Yes, you are. Okay, easy peasy. It's the thing where you want further evidence. And I guess the bit that I already knew was going to be tricky is how much energy and time to spend chasing responses. And I guess that's, you know, compounded by an order of magnitude when, you know, who knows where we're going to be in a few weeks' time. It might be that this, you know, inadvertently we're doing this at a really weird time anyway, and just what is reasonable and how many times should you sort of chase people if they don't respond.
Yeah, it's got to be proportionate, I think, and it's got to essentially build on the practices and processes you already have in place. So if you normally do a kind of mail out or data collection, it's making sure you think about, can you expand or improve that so that you are minimizing the time that you're spent on the phone or direct email chasing, and thinking about, are there some things in your yardsticks, assumptions, and other bits you pulled together for your local plan examination on deliverability that you can roll into this process?
Then, importantly, bearing in mind that this is effectively a written reps kind of process, the fact that you've done it isn't good enough. You have to record that you've done it, and the more proof you can muster, the better. But again, taking on board exactly your point, Shelley, that this has got to be proportional and sensible. And then I think the way that we're going to design the template is going to allow you to flag, if you like, the easy stuff and the tricky stuff. So some sites you'll say, is it going to be like this? And they'll say, yes, it's exactly like that. And it's, there's no dispute.
Yeah.
Others, there will be disputes. And I think, it stands to reason that those are going to be the ones that the inspector is going to want to spend more time on.
Yeah.
So there's this process where you do an initial assessment, you go through a consultation process, and then you revisit your judgments. And in particular, what you'll want to do, I guess, is two things really. One is, where your initial assessment is disputed by the developer, you'll need to potentially revisit your initial assessment, or consider, if you like, your side of it, their side of it, and come to a judgment. And then there'll be another set, and there would have been this other set in any event, where you've tried to get a response, and either the people are busy doing different things, or they're abroad at the time, or whatever it is, and you're just not going to have anything coming back to you, and that's when you're going to have to make a decision in the absence of that kind of response.
Yeah.
So I guess I think it is going to be one of those situations where common sense has got to be the order of the day. And from having a little poke about some of the evidence from the previous round of this, I think what you won't be able to get away with is you saying, the LPA saying one thing, the developer saying another thing, and you're going, well, no, we just believe ourselves and not them. I think you have to consider alternative viewpoints and just help the inspector follow your reasoning. You don't have to agree with the world. You might say, well, do you know what, if this is the case on this particular site, then we're going to explore, we're going to do a different approach, and we're going to, a different avenue will get us some delivery within 5 years. You just need to be clear, you need to be consistent, and you need to effectively allow someone who's only reading what you're writing down to show what you're up to.
Yeah.
I think the other point that's always worth re-emphasising is this proportionality point. So, big sites with big numbers, but with big, infrastructure requirements up front, you're not going to get away with saying, yeah, we just think that's all going to be fine. If there are, for example, an obvious one is like a highways junction or something that's going to require something to happen before anything can happen.
Yeah.
You'll need to show progress on that, as well as just having an optimistic developer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually that's a really key point. It's about being able to demonstrate that there are all these little things happening in terms of funding bids or applications for infrastructure, or those steps along the way that need to happen that mean you can then say perhaps that a significant site is deliverable. It's all those little pieces of the jigsaw that are gonna help demonstrate to the inspector that assessment is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what's going to happen over the next 3 months. The only thing I think I might just show briefly is the big fat spreadsheet, because that actually is where all the work is going to be.
Oh,
so what we've got in here, sorry?
I love a spreadsheet.
Yeah, bigger, the crunchier, the better. So this is a set of spreadsheets divided out into A and B. I think the thing that we're going to do with this is, at the moment, this is all your various sheets of your workbook put side by side, and you can see that they're similar but different. You've fallen into that trap of similar but different, so you can't move a site from one sheet to another sheet without doing a bit of messing about with it. So we're going to put together a kind of grand land unification sort of sheet, which will allow you to marshal your information about all these various things as they start off as allocations and end up being delivered. or you know, spend some time on your Brownfield register. Effectively, it's the same information in the same order, and effectively you'll go through that one gargantuan kind of effort to marshal it all once, but then you'll get maximum value for money out of it. Oh, is it children and snack time?
No.
I can't see your camera.
Yeah.
Right, so we're on 47 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say that we're done.
All right.
Is that all right?
Yeah, and I think we're obviously going to be putting everything up on the K Hub, and if people want to submit questions about anything we've talked about, or some help as to how to go through the template, then we can obviously jump in via there and help them.
Yes. I'll just see if I can show you the K Hub. I don't know whether I can still show you my. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
So K Hub looks like this. I have just posted a new forum thread, annual position statement materials. And bearing in mind what the kind of timing is on this, I think, you know, anyone asks any questions, we're going to give them an answer on Friday and Monday to do as well as we can to provide a prompt sort of turnaround service.
Yeah.
Right, brilliant. Well, you know, it's nice to talk to you, Shelly.
Yeah, good to talk to you too. Sorry about the crashing interference.
That's okay. I'll speak to you again
yeah,
soon.
we're all trying to work on top of each other at the moment.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right, mate. I think this is over.
Yeah.
I'm stopping recording. See ya.
Bye.